Now, some of the best advice I ever received was that if you're a Marxist, never say anything that you do not know. However, if you do know something and you know it in your soul, I mean, you absolutely know it to be true, never be afraid to say it. So never say anything that you do not know. But if you do know something and you really know it, don't be afraid to say it as loud as you can. Now, I've actually used that bit of advice in many different fields of life. But, for example, around 9/11, I don't know that the US government, was involved in 9/11. So I don't say that. I don't know that there was some kind of wider conspiracy. So I don't say that. I don't say things that I do not know. However, I do know that there are some things about the official story of 9/11 that don't exactly add up. So I am not afraid to say that. And I am not ashamed to say, now that we have the 28 pages, from Saudi Arabia, there's a lot of things about what we were told about 9/11 that don't add up. I know that, so I can say it. I don't say what I don't know. I only say what I do know, right? This is an important understanding. And it's a very valuable way of understanding things. I don't know who is going to win the upcoming presidential election. I don't know at this point. I do not know how soon the big economic fallout that is coming as a result of the pandemic and the capitalist crisis and the low-wage police state. I don't know when that big fallout is coming. But what I do know is that the US government and the US ruling class have committed themselves to economic policies and economic decisions that are digging their own graves, and that we are heading toward a bigger crisis. I've talked before about how, in a lot of ways, the United States, since the end of the Second World War, has been adopting what you could call Nazi economics. Now, it sounds like a hyperbolic term, right? It sounds, a little extreme. But if you understand fascism and you understand Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime in Germany, there was a certain economic approach that they applied in order to carry out and effectively rule Germany and lead to the great catastrophe known as the Second World War, to commit the horrendous mass murder known as the Holocaust. There was a certain economic philosophy that the Nazis preached, and it came from Hjalmar Schacht. One of the best books I ever read on the history of Nazi Germany was called Hitler's Banker, and it was a biography. It wasn't about Goebbels. It wasn't about various figures that are associated with it. It wasn't even really about Hitler. It was about Hjalmar Schacht, Hitler's banker. He was the economist of Nazi Germany, right? In the 1920s, Germany was having a capitalist crisis, just like every other Western country was at that point, the Great Depression. And so there was a feeling that the government needed to take action on some level to stabilize the economy, right? There was fear in Germany that the massive Communist Party might take power, might build socialism in Germany, there might be a revolution. There was fear that continuing instability might spill over into the rest of Europe. There was a feeling that they needed to do something. The capitalist class needed to do something in order to stabilize the economy. And so, it was decided by the Nazis when they took power that the government was going to spend a lot of money in order to stabilize the economy. But the question was, what would they spend the money on? And the Nazi state made the decision to spend the money on two things: prisons and military production, right? The Nazis took power. They outlawed the Communist Party. They outlawed the Social Democratic Party. They rounded up all the people that were leaders of the Communist Party, all the people that were leaders of the Social Democratic Party, and they put them in concentration camps. And they spent a lot of money to build these concentration camps. And they gave a lot of jobs to a lot of people to be guards in these concentration camps. And so all the people that were in the concentration camps were no longer unemployed and looking for a job because they were in a concentration camp. And all the people that were hired to build these concentration camps were no longer unemployed. They were, setting up concentration camps. And all these people that worked as guards in these concentration camps, they were no longer unemployed. They were working as guards in the concentration camps. And so you drastically reduced unemployment. And the Nazi state also decided that they were going to pull out of the Treaty of Versailles. They were going to start rebuilding Germany's military and rebuilding the weapons of war and the implements of destruction, rebuilding an air force, rebuilding guns and tanks and planes. And so, of course, many people that were previously unemployed got jobs building military equipment, were hired and worked in the so-called defense industry, or they from there, maybe they ended up joining the German military they started building. So the way the German fascist state was able to stabilize the economy of Germany in the 1930s was by investing in destruction, right? They said, we are going to stabilize the economy of Germany. We are going to rebuild the German economy from the capitalist crisis by putting huge sections of the population in prisons and building a huge prison apparatus and building a huge military apparatus. In essence, the economic basis of Nazism was that you can stimulate and stabilize a capitalist economy through destruction. Prisons are institutions of destruction. Military spending, war, tanks, those are, bombs. These things are implements of destruction. And Nazi economics is how they were able to create a temporary economic boom in Germany that ultimately only lasted maybe 4 or 5, 6 years at the most. And by 1939, Europe was heading off to the Second World War, one of the greatest catastrophes in human history. And that after the Second World War in the United States, many people observed that in the United States, we saw the rise of something called the military-industrial complex. In fact, U.S. President Eisenhower even warned about the danger of a military-industrial complex, because it seemed like the way the U.S. capitalist economy was continuing to move ahead was by doing the same thing that the Nazis had done, by spending lots of money on the military, right? That the military spending, military manufacturing became so essential to the U.S. economy that it was almost impossible for a president to stop the country from going to war, because war was what the U.S. economy was all about. Now, unlike Nazi Germany, they didn't create it really fast. It wasn't created in like 1 year. It was a gradual process throughout the 1950s and up into the 60s, building a whole economy centered around a military industrial complex. And then we know in the 1970s, in the late 1970s, after the political upsurge in the 1960s, after there was starting to be the process of deindustrialization in the United States, as living standards were starting to go down, as after the post-war economic expansion came to an end, we saw the creation gradually, again, not immediately like the Nazis did, but gradually, of a prison industrial complex, right? Of a system of prisons for profit, where economies were stimulated, people were hired, the workforce was cleared of unemployed workers by locking people in jail. And all across the United States, we saw the rate of incarceration rising as an economic stimulus. So since the end of the Second World War, the United States has been committed to Nazi economics. That the US leaders have decided that the way that they're going to stabilize the capitalist economy, the naturally unstable economy of profits in command, the way that they're going to stabilize it is by using the Nazi method, by using methods of destruction, building up tanks and bombs and guns, engaging in confrontations and big wars around the world, beating down countries around the world with war, and impoverishing and destroying the lives of their population, and turning human beings into a way to make profits through building up a low-wage police state. The ruling class of the United States has tried to stabilize capitalism with Nazi economics. And just like in Nazi Germany, it only worked for 5 or 6 years, and then World War II happened because their economy was about to fall apart. Just like in the United States, 2008, 2009, the economy came crashing down, right? The housing bubble burst, right? People say, what happened? What happened with the housing bubble burst? Why did this happen? Well, it happened because the living standards of average Americans were going down. Americans, they just didn't have the ability to buy cars and TV sets and houses like they once did. And, in the Federal Reserve, there was a panic going on. They were panicking because Americans just couldn't spend money like they once did. I don't know if folks remember. I remember that after 9/11, George W. Bush, who was the president of the United States, he was asked, what can Americans do if they want to help in the aftermath of 9/11? And George W. Bush said, if you want to defeat Al-Qaeda, You got to go shopping. Go shopping. That's how you can defeat the terrorists. And it was the dumbest thing. And people are like, go shopping? What is he talking about? But what George W. Bush was talking about, why he said that, was because in the back room with Alan Greenspan, the protege of Ayn Rand, the sociopath who did not believe in altruism and compassion, the protege of Ayn Rand, Alan Greenspan, was telling George W. Bush, you got to get them to spend money. The economy is going to crash if you don't get them to spend money. They were panicking inside the Federal Reserve because Americans weren't spending money. Why were Americans not spending money? Because our wages have been going down for a few decades. Because we have record rates of student debt and household debt. Because our neighborhoods don't even have paved roads in some cases. They're unpaving the roads throughout the United States. Why were Americans not spending money? When you drive the wages of Americans down, when you drive the wages of working people down, their ability to spend decreases. The working class is also the consumers. And if you drive the living standards and the wages of working people down, pretty soon they can't buy back all the products that they are producing. And you have a classic crisis of overproduction. So Alan Greenspan was there in the Federal Reserve. He was whispering in the ear of George W. Bush and telling him to tell Americans to keep spending. What also happened was there was a huge deregulation of the lending of money. And all kinds of easy credit, lending practices, were legalized because there was a desperation to keep Americans spending. And, the mortgage crisis was based on the fact that eventually, after so many, predatory mortgage housing loans had been spent, pretty soon the country was glutted with houses that could not be sold. Pretty soon you had, homes all over the United States being foreclosed. And you actually got a situation in 2008, 2009, where in Nevada, outside of Las Vegas, there was a tent city that was erected. All these families that had their homes foreclosed and were homeless were living in tents outside of the city of Las Vegas in Nevada. And they're living in tents, right? And what was going on there was you had a situation where thousands of Americans were homeless because there were too many houses, right? That was the 2008 financial collapse. A situation where people were homeless all across the United States, not because there was a shortage of housing, but because there were too many houses. This is the irrationality of capitalism. Only under capitalism can people be homeless because there are too many houses. Only under capitalism can people be hungry and starve because there's too much food. This is the irrationality of a system of profits in command. And this is the crisis that we are facing here in the United States.